Hello film fans and welcome to this episode of the Sherlockian. Now, there is one thing you can say about David Attenborough documentaries. They're not normally whimsical, are they? You don't really get a sense of kind of the fantastical or even a sense of humour. They're generally quite serious, very well documented, beautifully photographed, very intense documentaries, often with strong messages about climate change or conservation, and they're not the kind of thing that you can imagine David Attenborough mucking around on when he's doing. However, today I'm going to be reviewing a documentary, David Attenborough Natural History Museum Alive, which is almost a complete contrast to everything I've just said. It was unsurprisingly not filmed by the BBC. It was filmed by Attenborough in partnership with Sky, and as a result, it's got quite a different kind of tone. Basically, the central hypothesis of the documentary is that David Attenborough has snuck into the Natural History Museum, hidden behind one of the cabinets, and then once everyone's gone home, he's popped out and gone to look round all the exhibits, which have mysteriously come alive. Now, this is an absolutely brilliant theme for a documentary in general, but it did make me wonder whether anyone had actually tried to hide in the Natural History Museum and pop out after hours. I could definitely consider that someone might have tried it at some point. After all, the British Natural History Museum is famous for being really, really crowded. So I could really understand someone trying it. And if nobody tried it before this documentary, I bet you that somebody tried it afterwards. But to get onto the documentary, it's an absolutely cracking piece of entertainment, shall we say. Basically, it has this wide selection of different prehistoric animals which come to life, and you see kind of wandering around, and David Attenborough kind of hides behind pillars and things and watches them. My favourite bit, I think, was the bit with the dodo in it, because it told me quite a lot of stuff about dodos which I didn't actually know. For a start, I didn't realise until I saw this documentary that they don't actually have any complete specimens of dodos, which, considering that dodos went extinct not that long ago in the grand scheme of things, it's really rather incredible and actually quite sad when you think about it. They were wiped out so quickly that nobody actually bothered to collect any. I did a little bit of research after watching this documentary, and it turns out that they do have the remains of kind of the skin and the kind of some of the flesh, I think, or kind of preserved flesh, obviously, and the beak of one dodo specimen, just the neck and the head, but they haven't got anything else. They've obviously got quite a few skeletons of them, but apart from that, just nothing, and it's absolutely incredible. What I particularly like as well is there is a specimen in the Natural History Museum, but it's a fake. Or rather, it's not a fake, it's a recreation. Recreated, I think, can't remember exactly when, but sometime in the 18th, 19th centuries. And David Attenborough actually takes you through it and why it's actually not perfect. Apparently, they used goose feathers, because I guess that was the most readily available form of feather that they had at the time. And apparently it's the actual specimen of a real dodo would probably have been like taller, would have stood more upright, and it would have actually had down rather than feathers, because obviously it didn't need real proper feathers because it didn't fly, so it just needed something to keep it warm, like flightless birds you see today, like say kiwis or something like that. Yeah, but it's absolutely brilliant. I enjoy the scene where it comes alive and David Attenborough feeds it with fruit and then it pecks him on the knee. That I particularly enjoyed, and you see them strutting around and sort of displaying to each other. One thing it does talk about as well is why dodos had such massive beaks, which is something I'd never really considered before. Because they're right, really. I mean, dodos, it almost seems a little bit oversized, doesn't it? I mean, why would something that was flightless, had no natural predators, need such a humongous beak? And they suggest it could have possibly used it for, cracking open shellfish to get the calcium from the shells. It could have used it for sort of fighting amongst the males. And that seems to me probably the most likely explanation, because I don't know how much we know about sexual dimorphism between dodos, male and female, but it seems likely that probably males were bigger, and as a result, they may have had bigger beaks. But yeah, I really enjoyed that scene because a dodo is quite an iconic bird, isn't it? Very iconic. And to see one actually strutting around and pecking David Attenborough and that kind of thing was actually quite good fun. The other bit I really enjoyed was the bit with the Archaeopteryx in it. Now, I think the CGI in this documentary is really, really rather good. The Archaeopteryx looks lovely. It does look more bird-like than sort of reptile, which I think is an interesting kind of stylistic choice. I mean, obviously, no one really knows exactly what an Archaeopteryx looked like. They've just got the fossil remains of them. But I think it's probably a pretty good bet that that's what they probably did look like. Certainly was, a nice educated guess. And I really liked seeing it fly around. It wasn't so much gliding between trees, which is what you often see in kind of older depictions of Archaeopteryx. This one was genuinely flying and was quite skillful, picking insects out the air. I presume they were moths if they were in the Natural History Museum. But anyway, it was really good fun, and I quite liked the way it looked stylistically. I think one of the most controversial depiction, though, in this documentary is of the Gigantopithecus. Now, it's not surprising they chose to show it because it's really rather famous, isn't it? I didn't realise until I did some bit more research after watching this documentary that actually Gigantopithecus almost all the specimens they actually have of them is of their teeth, which is interesting because obviously you're gleaning quite a lot about the overall like the body shape of an animal just from some things in its mouth. So it's quite difficult to actually decide what they look like. And obviously there's quite a lot of guesswork involved. In this depiction, they show it as it kind of traditionally was often shown as being this huge ape, about 3 meters tall, so much taller than a modern human, with lots of hair, but with quite a flat humanoid face, and bipedal, walks on its 2 legs like humans do. Now, I did a little bit of research after this because I sort of thought I didn't know that was exactly how they were often shown. I mean, I don't know a lot about Gigantopithecus, if that even is the plural term of Gigantopithecus, but I sort of thought, it doesn't seem very like most modern apes. Now, maybe it's just, a bipedal form of older ape, but I was interested, and it turns out that actually their depiction is a bit old-fashioned. Most modern depictions of them actually show them far more like modern gorillas, say, sort of walking around on their knuckles, which is interesting. They're actually thought of now as being more closely related to modern orangutans than they are to modern people, which is also quite interesting, I think. I did have to admit, when I saw it, I did think the fact that they didn't necessarily climb around in trees is not necessarily um, it doesn't necessarily disprove the fact that they didn't walk around on, like, for want of a better word, 4 legs. I mean, I know kind of knuckles isn't really 4 legs, but you know what I mean. Because after all, modern gorillas and chimpanzees, I mean, I know chimpanzees spend a fair amount of time in the trees, but gorillas really don't that much. And they still walk around on their knuckles. So yeah, I could definitely see that a Gigantopithecus might have done that, and also it would probably be quite a very energy efficient way of supporting all that bulk to have not just have to walk around on 2 legs. That puts a lot of strain on their hips and their knees. So it kind of makes sense. That said, though, I did really enjoy the visual effect of the bipedal Gigantopithecus and it kind of wandering around the Natural History Museum and David Attenborough kind of hiding and watching it from a distance. It was really quite good. And I suppose they probably wanted to recreate that kind of effect because I know a lot of cryptozoologists who study, like supposedly, I don't know what the mythical creatures like, Bigfoot and what's that other one in America? Um, can't remember. Oh, the Bigfoot is the American one. The Abominable Snowman. Things like that. They often cite Gigantopithecus as a possible cause of that myth. Which I suppose is possible. I mean, it's not very likely they're still wandering around, is it? It's more likely they're people in suits. But you can kind of see where they get the idea from. And I think they were trying to recreate that effect, that, big, giant, hairy ape with a kind of human face, but not really. And yeah, just to kind of give an impression of kind of, excitement and maybe even terror. The other bit I really enjoyed was the bit with the ichthyosaur when it comes alive. Now, this doesn't really make much sense because ichthyosaurs, well, swam. So I don't really understand how it was really swimming around the Natural History Museum. But there's a really sweet scene where a dolphin also comes alive. They kind of play with each other and they go round and round the Diplodocus in the centre of, well, the then centre of the kind of the entrance hall at the Natural History Museum. Talking of the Diplodocus, actually, they also have a lovely bit where that comes alive as well. But there's also a baby one which runs around all over the floor. And it's so super cute. It's lovely. And that scene with David Attenborough is kind of trying to find it in the laboratory, and where the egg has supposedly hatched. It is really fun. I enjoyed that. Incidentally, I learnt some quite interesting information about the Diplodocus in the Natural History Museum, which is that, well, one, it's not real. It's a plaster cast of an original in the Carnegie Institute in America. But also, it kind of came about, according to David Attenborough, that the Natural History Museum have got one. Because Edward VII, who was king in kind of the Edwardian period, so like most of the 1900s in Britain and the British Empire, basically, Andrew Carnegie had the original of this Diplodocus skeleton. Well, I mean, he did. He had the Diplodocus skeleton in his museum I think in America somewhere. I've got a feeling it's Pennsylvania, but I might have made that up. And Carnegie was an incredibly rich bloke. He was like, he was a bit like, I don't know, Elon Musk of his time. Really famously wealthy man. And as an American billionaire, he obviously had quite a lot of prestige. And indeed, the Diplodocus subspecies, which is in that American museum, is actually named after him. It's got the name Diplodocus carnegii, I think, which is quite cool. But Edward VII was obviously quite jealous of this, and so he wanted one for his own museum. He was a patron of the Natural History Museum, so he kind of felt a bit like shortchanged that Carnegie was just, obviously an American businessman. It might be a very rich one, but he wasn't royal, was he? Carnegie, he felt that Carnegie had got one over him, so he decided that he was going to have one as well in his museum. And obviously, they couldn't find a Diplodocus skeleton, so they decided to make a plaster cast of the one in the Carnegie Institute, which is quite a nice idea. So yeah, that's how it eventually got there. It's actually no longer there, the Diplodocus, which I think is rather a shame because it was kind of a set piece. I think the Natural History Museum might have been a little bit embarrassed by the fact that it wasn't an original, because they've now got a blue whale skeleton in there, which is one. So maybe they decided that. I mean, it's quite a bold thing to do, isn't it, to get rid of something so iconic? But I suppose maybe they just wanted to change. And the blue whale does look really good because it's obviously up on the ceiling, so you kind of get a sense of how big they are. And there is that kind of fascination, isn't there, with blue whales, because they still exist. So you actually get a sense of how big they are still. Whereas with a Diplodocus, it's how big something was, which is now no longer alive, if that makes any sense. But overall, I think this documentary does a fantastic job of kind of advertising the Natural History Museum. It makes it feel really cool. And it does, I mean, it was clearly shot in the Natural History Museum. You can actually see the places you can just go as a visitor, which is quite cool as well. And also, I think the CGI is pretty good overall. I mean, you can tell most of the animals in it aren't real, but I remember when I watched it when it first came out, I did actually think, wow, that looks really realistic. And I think it holds up still quite well to this day. Obviously, there's nothing that goes out of date, is there, like CGI, because they're constantly improving all the programming that goes behind it. But overall, I think it's pretty cool. So I would 100% recommend this documentary. I think it's fantastic. It's only 64 minutes long, which is a shame. I wish they'd made it longer. But they cram so much stuff in it. It's absolutely amazing. If you were going to do a list of every single animal that's in this, it's got like giant moas, it's got a horned eagle, it's got giant sloths, it's got Smilodon, dodos, ichthyosaurs, Gigantopithecus, and the Diplodocus. It's got so much stuff. So yeah, absolutely incredible. So I would 100% recommend this documentary. I hope you enjoyed watching this review of it. If you have, feel free to subscribe to the channel. There's a link obviously down below you can click on. You can also follow me on Twitter. There's a link in the description below. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll hopefully see you again. Goodbye.